I'm going to be looking today this afternoon then at the subject of Israel in our time, modern Israel, and considering whether Israel today is an accident of history or the fulfilment of prophecy. I believe that it is fulfilment of prophecy. I believe that there are many things which are happening in Israel today which point us to the fulfilment of the words of the prophets and also to the soon coming of the Messiah, Yeshua. Some people in the churches say it's got nothing to do with Israel. Israel is a secular state. There have been wars and troubles in Israel ever since it's reborn. Palestinians have suffered because of Israel. There's been all kinds of problems, so how can it be something which God is behind? I believe that it is in the will of God, that God has brought Jewish people back to the land of Israel, and that God still has unfinished business relating to Israel, which is going to be worked out in the not too distant future. Words of the prophet Ezekiel. For I will take you from among the nations, gather you out of all countries, and bring you into your own land. Then I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you shall be clean. I will cleanse you from all your filthiness, from all your idols. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. I will take the heart of stone out of your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes, and you will keep my judgments and do them. Then you shall dwell in the land that I gave to your fathers. You shall be my people. I will be your God. Notice I mentioned there, to the land that I gave to your fathers. Who are the fathers? The fathers are Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. So here we have something which relates to the Abrahamic covenant and the fact that God is going to bring the people out of the nations, gather them out of all countries, bring them into your own land. Interesting, the verb for to gather in Hebrew is yekabetz, which is a verb form of the noun kibbutz. One of the ways in which God has gathered the people to the land of Israel is to replant the ancient land, to sow the crops, to put the trees, and to make the land which was once desolate into a fertile land, as Ezekiel also prophesied would happen in Ezekiel chapter 36. If you look at this verse carefully, you can see that there are actually two stages. There is a first stage, which is the physical birth. I'll bring you back from the nations. Then I will sprinkle clean water on you. And this speaks about a spiritual birth. And as a result of the spiritual birth, it says here that I will put a new heart and a new spirit within you. Anybody here had a new heart and a new spirit? If you believe in Jesus, then you should have been born of the Spirit. And that if you're born of the Spirit, we receive a new heart, a new spirit. And God puts his law within us that we might walk in his ways and walk in his judgments and do them. And God says that if Israel turns to him and walks in his ways, then he's going to keep them and bless them in the land. Of course, one of the issues which makes people wonder if Israel is of God is that the unbelief of Israel. And if you go to Israel today, you'll find that it is, for the most part, a secular country. You could go to Tel Aviv and find all the sorts of things which you find wrong with London, for example. You can find prostitutes, you can find gay pride marches, you can find people who are doing things which are considered sinful in the eyes of the Lord and are sinful in the eyes of the Lord. And you could say, well, is this the Holy Land? And of course it is a land which is full of sinners like this land. But it's also a land, I believe, which God has chosen and which also has some remarkable features to it. You could look at the achievements of Israel, the amazing way in which they brought people back from all of the nations and brought them into one country. The way they've made the desolate parts of the land into fertile places, where they planted trees and brought even the change in the climate to bring rains to the land and to make that what was once a desolate land into a fertile land. Barbara put together a little pamphlet here, which you can find on the table there, which is called So You Want to Boycott Israel. There are a lot of people who do want to boycott Israel, and it says here some of the things which you have to boycott if you want to boycott Israel properly. The amazing technology. Israel is responsible for many of the computer technology that we have today, so if you want to actually use your computer, basically you should boycott. If you want to boycott Israel, you should stop using your computer. Your mobile phone. Israel has exported all kinds of health, amazing developments in health needs, in cures for cancer, for different diseases, and Israel's work in the area of medical research has been absolutely astounding and has brought blessing and help to people all over the earth. Spoke about its agricultural work. Israel has exported its agricultural technology to parts of the world, especially to Africa, helping to bring agriculture to arid regions and to help them to develop their lands agriculturally. A tremendous amount of things which Israel has done, which are positive and which are wonderful. And yet Israel is, for the most part, as I say, a land which is, at the present time, in unbelief. 70% of Israel is probably secular, about 30% religious, and there is a divide between the secular and the religious. And for many people in Israel, both the church and the synagogue are not particularly part of their way of life. For many people in Israel, of course, there is a reason why they don't believe in Jesus. Perhaps the biggest reason is because of, as I've said earlier, the bad witness of Christianity to Jewish people down through the ages. And Jewish people who've been called Christ killers and blamed for the death of Jesus and cursed in the name of Jesus, it's very hard for them to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Saviour. On the subject of the Christ killers, by the way, Jesus said concerning himself, "No man takes my life from me, I give it of my own accord." And Jesus laid down his life in order that we might be redeemed through his death, his resurrection. And he wants people to receive blessing from believing in Jesus. You could also find that the synagogue has been basically telling Jewish people not to believe in Jesus. So you have a lot of influences on Jewish people to disbelieve in Jesus. But despite all these things, God says that the day is going to come when he's going to put his Spirit within them and put his Spirit within them through faith in Jesus, the Messiah. And I believe that the events we're seeing are the beginning of a process which is unfinished as yet, but which will finish with the return of Jesus, the Messiah. And as Ezekiel says, "I'm going to take you from among the nations, gather you out of countries, bring you into your own land." And here's a picture of new immigrants arriving by ship this time. This was one of the early arrivals by ship to Haifa. Most of them come today by plane to Ben Gurion Airport. But all coming, and I believe in response to the words of the prophets, which say he will set up a banner for the nations, he will assemble the outcasts of Israel, gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. That's Isaiah chapter 11, verse 11. And we've seen Israel, Jewish people coming from the north, the south, the east and the west, back to the land of Israel. And this is actually a sign to the nations of the world. Jeremiah 31 verse 10 says, "Hear the word of the Lord, O you nations, declare it in the hours afar off. Say, he who scattered Israel will gather him and keep him as a shepherd does his flock." Hear the word of the Lord. The word hear there is hear and pay attention to the word of the Lord, you nations. So this is actually a word which is not directed to Israel, but to the nations, the Goyim. And if we are from the nations today, we are to hear the word of the Lord and to pay attention to the fact that God has scattered Israel, but also gathered them and brought them back to his land. Land and back to Jerusalem. This is a map which was made by a German Protestant pastor back in 1581 called Heinrich Bunting. And it shows Jerusalem at the center of the earth. There's Jerusalem, there's Europa, there's Asia, there's Africa. And indeed, Jerusalem is at the center of the earth, if you look at it geographically. As the prophet Ezekiel said, "This is Jerusalem. I've set her in the midst of the nations and the countries all around her." And in the Bible it says that Jerusalem is again going to be the object of the concern of the nations in the latter days, as we shall see. Jerusalem, the burdensome stone, but Jerusalem is also described in the Bible as the city of the great king. The place where God says, "I put my name there." The place where the Lord Jesus was crucified and rose again from the dead, where the Holy Spirit fell upon the disciples and the church was born on the day of Pentecost. And the place also where Jesus is coming back to, the focal point of the conflict in the last days. And in Zechariah chapter 12, it tells us that, "Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of drunkenness to all surrounding peoples when they lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem. It shall happen in that day that I make Jerusalem a very heavy stone for all peoples. All who would heave it away will surely be cut in pieces, though all nations of the earth are gathered against it." Sometimes I think about Zechariah writing those words down, and he must have been puzzled when he saw the phrase, "though all nations of the earth are gathered against it." And maybe he said to the Lord, "Surely you don't mean all nations, perhaps you mean Lebanon and Israel and Syria and Jordan and Egypt and those countries round about." And fortunately, Zechariah wasn't a modern theologian, so he didn't scrub out the bits of the Bible he didn't understand, but he wrote it down, and he wrote down all nations. And what do you find today? All nations are concerned over the status of Jerusalem. Israel, of course, is a very big country. There you can see it. Perhaps you can't actually see it unless you look hard. It's too small to have its name on the map, but there's Israel with Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, all these countries surrounding it. Much bigger countries, much more powerful countries with a culture which is actually opposed to Israel for the most part. Most of these countries, in fact all of these countries, actually dominated by the religion of Islam. And Islam actually has a theological view, which is that the world is divided into what they call the Dar al-Islam, which means the house of Islam, and the Dar al-Harb, which means the house of the enemy. And the goal of the jihad actually is to convert the Dar al-Harb, the house of the enemy, into the Dar al-Islam, the house of Islam, which is partly what they'd like to do to Europe. But part of the Islamic theology is that if a country is ruled by Muslims, then the Muslims are the rulers, and the Jews and Christians are allowed to have their own communities, which are called dhimmi communities, which have to be second-class citizens under the Muslims, and that they shouldn't in any way rule over Muslims. Also, that if a country has been Islamic, it should remain Islamic until the end of days. So if a country turns from being Islamic to being non-Islamic, that's actually a contradiction of history. And here they see a country which is, as far as they're concerned, in the middle of the Muslim world, in which the Jews are ruling over Muslims. And indeed the contradiction of history, as far as they're concerned, is that Jerusalem and the city land of Israel is in non-Jewish hands. And therefore, from the Islamic point of view, there is a motivation to remove the state of Israel from the map. And we have a word from the Psalms, which Psalm 83, which tells us, "Come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be remembered no more. They've consulted together with one consent, they form a confederacy against you. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagirites, Gebal, Ammon and Amalek, Philistia with the inhabitants of Tyre, Assyria has joined with them, they've helped the children of Lot." If you translate those names into modern countries, you'll find they're all Arab countries which surround Israel: Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, Syria, and Assyria, which is the north of Syria, and Iraq. All countries which actually came against Israel at the founding of the state and have in some way been opposed to Israel ever since, even though they have a peace treaty with Egypt. We'll come on to that in a moment. Maybe THEODORE HERZL hadn't borne that in mind when he proclaimed in the Basel Congress in 1897, "Zionism seeks to establish a home for the Jewish people in Palestine secured under public law." And back in 1897, he addressed the Basel Congress of the Zionist Federation and spoke of the need for the Jewish people to have a homeland of their own. Herzl, interestingly, was not a religious Jew, he was a secular Jew. He was a reporter on the newspaper. He attended the Dreyfus trial in Paris, which turned out to be an anti-Semitic trial against the captain of the French army called Dreyfus, who was accused of treason. And he then saw the mobs running through the streets of Paris crying death to the Jews, and he decided that the solution to the Jewish question was not for the Jewish people to be assimilated, to join into the nations of Europe, but to have their own country and to be a people. The people without a land should be the people with a land, the land of Israel. At the time of the Congress at Basel, Herzl said, "Were I to sum up the Basel Congress in one word, which I shall guard against pronouncing publicly, it would be this: at Basel I founded the Jewish state. If I said this out loud, I'd be greeted by universal laughter. In 5 years perhaps, and certainly in 50 years, everyone will perceive it." Remarkably, 50 years later, the UN General Assembly voted to partition Palestine, which led to the declaration of the State of Israel in 1948. Interestingly, David Barron, who was a Messianic Jew, a Hebrew Christian, who wrote a number of books from which we have a lot of our understanding of the significance of Messianic prophecies, and also foresaw the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, attended the First Zionist Congress. Some of the people there said that as a Hebrew Christian, a Messianic Jew, he shouldn't be there because he believed in Jesus, but Theodore HERZL actually went and sat down next to him to show that he approved of him being there. And Barron actually said that as he attended this Congress, he saw the beginning of the dry bones coming together, as in Ezekiel chapter 37. And it was another reminder of the fact that many Christians, both Jewish and Gentile, throughout the 19th century foresaw that there would be a return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, and wrote about it, even campaigned for it. You have people like William Wilberforce, Lord Shaftesbury and others in England who believed that there would be a return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, and campaigned for this throughout the 19th century. In fact, some of the Christians had the idea before the Jewish Zionist movement really got going. So there was this connection actually from the beginning with Christians and the birth of Zionism. In 1917, one of the reasons why HEZBOLLAH might have thought he would be laughed to scorn, saying that he would found the Jewish state, was because at the time Palestine, as it then was part of the Turkish Ottoman Empire, a Sunni Muslim entity which was not particularly favourable towards Jews or to Christians, and was opposed to any setting up of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. But in 1917, the British Army under General Allenby took Jerusalem, and Jerusalem became, Palestine became part of the British Mandate. And remarkably, at the same time, the Balfour Declaration was signed in Britain by Lord Balfour, which proclaimed that His Majesty's government views with favour the establishment in Palestine of a whoops, I lost the plot there. The establishment of a national homeland for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights of political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. This year we're actually celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration. Balfour Declaration itself was an interesting fact of history. From a historical point of view, it was actually not a prior agenda for Britain at the time of 1917, when they're in the midst of the the First World War. Russian Revolution had just taken place, and yet they put out this declaration of the intent that there should be a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Interestingly, Lord Balfour was brought up in a Christian home, a Scottish Presbyterian home, where apparently the study of the scriptures was a regular part of their practice, and particularly the study of scriptures relating to the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. As was Lloyd George, the Prime Minister at the time, and Winston Churchill, who was also influential in the government at that time. Those men may not have been living particularly Christian lives at the time, but they had this background, and that was part of the motivation for making this Balfour Declaration. Sadly, the British didn't really follow up on the Balfour Declaration, and in the years of the British Mandate, actually began to move against the immigration of Jewish people to Palestine, particularly during the later years in the 30s, when Nazi Germany was beginning to manifest its horrific persecution of Jewish people. And Britain actually closed the doors to Jewish immigration just at the time when Jewish people really needed to have a homeland to go to, as the Nazis were beginning their terrible program of extermination of the Jews. Nevertheless, because of the Balfour Declaration, the words of the Balfour Declaration were actually incorporated into the San Remo Declaration, which became part of the League of Nations mandate, which led to it becoming accepted by the United Nations in 1947. So it had a part to play in the development of Israel as a nation. In 1948, we had the UN Partition Plan. Resolution 181 which was that the land of Palestine west of the Jordan should be partitioned, with a Jewish state, which would be the blue area here, and an Arab state, which would be the brown area there, and Jerusalem in the center was to be an international city. If that had gone forth, there would have been a Palestinian state in 1948, when Israel was proclaimed. The UN partition plan was voted with 33 in favor, including the Soviet Union, 13 against, mostly the Muslim Arab countries, and 10 abstentions, which included the United Kingdom. And as you can see, the land here is quite a small sliver of land, hard to defend, with the main area there, the populated area, the Negev desert, and some Jewish settlements around the Galilee being part of the proposed land of Israel. Despite the fact that this wasn't all that Israel really wanted, on May the 14th, 1948, David Ben-Gurion proclaimed the State of Israel, saying, "By virtue of our natural and historic rights and on the basis of the resolution of the United Nations General Assembly, we hereby declare the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine to be known as Medinat Israel, the State of Israel." And this was a statement which many saw as a fulfillment of the prophecy of Isaiah 66, verse 8. "Who has heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Shall the earth be made to give birth in one day? Shall a nation be born at once? For as soon as Zion was in labor, she gave birth to her children." A nation born in a day, as the State of Israel came into being on May the 14th, 1948. The day after, 5 nations from Egypt, Transjordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq invaded. Their intention was to destroy the State of Israel at birth, to drive the Jews into the sea, to make the Jewish blood run, and to prevent Israel from coming into being. Survivors of the Holocaust who just arrived were given guns and told to fight for the nation. And against all the odds, with Arabs having far superior weaponry, armies, against all those odds, Israel not only survived, but pushed back the borders to the borders which we see here, which became the ceasefire lines, which became the borders of Israel, recognized in 1949. So you have here Israel with Tel Aviv, Jerusalem here, and the area which is known as the West Bank, occupied by Jordan, the area of Gaza, taken by Egypt and ruled by them from 1949 through to 1967. Just a little word about the West Bank. Everybody knows this territory here today as the West Bank. It's always called that in the news reports. It's called the West Bank because as far as Jordan is concerned, it's the West Bank of the Jordan. Jordan used to be called Transjordan, but then in 1950 it absorbed this area into its territory and called itself Jordan, with the West Bank being part of the State of Jordan. Interestingly, Jordan made that statement. It was not recognized by the UN. There are only 2 countries which recognize the legitimacy of that arrangement. Those were Pakistan and Great Britain. During this time, Jerusalem was a divided city. Like Berlin, it had an international border through the middle of it with barbed wire, soldiers guarding it, and you couldn't cross from one side to the other. The western side of Jerusalem was in Israel, the modern city, where today the Knesset is, and much of the modern part which you visit if you go to Israel. The old city of Jerusalem, the historic part, was across the border in Jordan and Mount of Olives, the old city of Jerusalem with the Temple Mount, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Wailing Wall, all of the places which are the historic sites where religious people like to go to pray, were in the old city of Jerusalem. During this time, the Jewish quarter in the old city of Jerusalem was actually void of Jewish people. They were driven out, and Jews were not able to live on the eastern side of the border of Jerusalem. So historic places where Jews had lived for centuries were made Judenrein, to use the German phrase, made void of Jews. And for all that time between 1948 and 1967, Jews could not go to pray at the Western Wall because it was in Jordan. So Jerusalem was divided. Then in 1967, we have the Six-Day War. This is probably my first memory of the events. I was a student at the time, studying at Cambridge in my second year of my exams, listening to the news and being somehow very concerned that Nasser of Egypt was saying that the Jews were going to be driven into the sea and that there was going to be an elimination of the state of Israel. For some reason I felt very engaged in this. I even hitchhiked down from Cambridge to London and offered my services at the Israeli embassy to help Israel. They said, well, you probably should get permission from your parents to go, because I was under 21 at the time. They weren't very keen on sending their only son to the world's #1 trouble spot. And as it happened, Israel did very well without any help from me. But for some reason, I wasn't a Christian at the time, but I just felt it was important what happened then. And that was really when I began to be conscious of the Middle East and of Israel. But in 1967, amazingly, Israel faced attack from Egypt, from Syria, and then from Jordan. As I said, the Egyptian leader, Abdel Nasser, said that it was time to make an end of the Jewish state, to throw the Jews into the sea. They were preparing for mass graves in Tel Aviv. There was a feeling that this was going to be a terrible onslaught. But instead of being driven into the sea, Israel made a preemptive strike, wiped out all of Egypt's air force, and within 6 days had taken the whole of the Sinai, Gaza, the Golan Heights in the north from Syria, the Golan Heights, incidentally, from which the Syrians had been firing weapons, missiles and guns down into the valley below during all of the time between 48 and 67, and of course the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, including the whole of the city of Jerusalem. So that was an amazing event, the Six-Day War, and we have the iconic picture of the Israeli paratroopers at the Western Wall on the 7th of June 1967. For the first time, this place now under Israeli control, perhaps for the first time since even, you could say, before the time of Jesus, because even the time of Jesus it was under Roman control. But now here they were back in the heart of the old city of Jerusalem. And the chief of staff of Israel, the General Moshe Dayan, stood at the Western Wall and he said, "We have regained our holiest place, never again to depart." And since that time, Jerusalem has been run as a united city, with Jewish settlement expanding all around it. In 1980, Israel issued its Jerusalem law, stating that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. And in present times, Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that Jerusalem remains the indivisible capital of Israel and should remain a united city ruled by Israel. Many Christians saw this as the fulfillment of Jesus' words, Jerusalem will be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. I don't think it is quite, but it is certainly a movement in that direction, because there's still a part of the Jerusalem which is not under Israeli control. That's this place here. So what's this place? This is the Temple Mount. Or if you want to look at it from the Arab point of view, it's the Haram al-Sharif. And on this place here is the Dome of the Rock Mosque, the gold one, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, known as the farthest mosque as far as Islam is concerned. And the Muslims say that this is the third holiest place for Muslims in the world, after Mecca and Medina. Interestingly, if you look in the Bible, you'll find that Jerusalem is mentioned some 806 times, 660 in the Old Testament, 146 in the New Testament. How many times do you think it's mentioned in the Quran? 0. Not once. Nevertheless, it is the place which is considered very important to the Muslims. Historically, actually, when people went to Jerusalem in the 19th century, before Israel was there, they found a broken down city full of beggars and filth and not much attention paid to it. But now it's the most important place in the world, apart from Mecca and Medina, to Jewish people, to the Muslims, sorry. And apart from the brief Crusader period in the Middle Ages, Jerusalem has been ruled by different Muslim powers from the year 638 through to 1917. Interestingly, around the dome of this place, the Dome of the Rock, I don't know if you've been inside it, there's some Arabic writing. You have to take your shoes off and acknowledge the power of Allah when you go in there. So, though I have been in there, I don't think I go in there again, knowing what I know now. But around the dome of the rock, there is words in Arabic which say not that Allah has a son, and basically put a curse on anyone who believes it. So interestingly, standing in the holy place is an Antichrist text and an Antichrist building. Whether that is meant by the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, I'm not going to be dogmatic on that one, but it's interesting that there in the Temple Mount, actually what stands is a place which denies the person of our Lord Jesus Christ and denies that God is a triunity of Father, Son and Holy Spirit, and puts a curse actually on those who believe it. So interestingly, this place here is at the heart of the conflict, and when Israel took possession of the old city of Jerusalem, they ceded control of this place to what they call the Waqf, which is the Islamic authority, and that is governed actually from Jordan. So this place here is actually not under total Israeli control. In fact, Jews and Christians are not allowed to pray there. If you go up there and open your Bible and start a prayer meeting, Muslims will come and tell you to clear off in no uncertain terms. And especially if you're Jewish and you go up there and start praying, then you might cause a riot or even an uprising against doing that. And from this place, this is the place where they do the preaching. From the Al-Aqsa Mosque, there is almost unending sermons of hatred against Israel coming from the imams who preach there. So this is actually probably the most strategic place in the world. Some Jewish people would like to rebuild a temple. In fact, if you've been to Jerusalem, you may have come across the Temple Mount faithful who want to rebuild the temple. There's not a lot of place to build it. Some say that they could build it just to the north of the Golden Dome rock. But anything which is any attempt to build anything on that place would cause an absolute uprising from the Muslims, could even start a Third World War. Nevertheless, there are those who would believe that there will be a temple rebuilt in Jerusalem. From my understanding, if there is before Jesus comes, it will be an Antichrist temple, not a temple which we should actually be supporting the building of. But nevertheless, that is, one would say, the heart of the matter. And of course, the Palestinians, backed by the Arab Muslim states, want a Palestinian state with its capital in the eastern part of Jerusalem. Palestinian Authority leader Mahmoud Abbas has declared one day a young Palestinian will raise the Palestinian flag over Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the state of Palestine. So is it the capital of Israel or is it the capital of Palestine? That's one of the issues which is before the nations today. And it speaks about Jerusalem again as the burdensome stone. In 1993, the Oslo Accords were signed between the Israeli government and the Palestine Liberation Organization. Here you have a photograph of President Clinton and Yitzhak Rabin, the Prime Minister then of Israel, assassinated just a couple of years later, and Yasser Arafat, the leader of the Palestine Liberation Organization. The Oslo Accords made what was called the Declaration of Principles on Interim Self-Government Arrangements, that the Palestinians should have a government which would start first in Gaza and Jericho, and would be the first step in a final settlement, in which at the final settlement they would deal with such issues as the status of Jerusalem. It broke down 7 years later when Arafat refused an offer from the then Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak, which would have given actually much of what the Palestinians want, half of the old city of Jerusalem and a Palestinian state with the old city of Jerusalem as its capital. Arafat said that he couldn't give up even 1 inch of the old city of Jerusalem, and he said that anyone who would not keep the whole of Jerusalem is not an Arab and not a Muslim. And instead of accepting the offer, he then launched what became the Second Intifada. There's a famous foreign minister of Israel, a man called Abba Eban, who once said, "The Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity." Well, they did on that occasion. And it led to the Second Intifada, which was the uprising of the Arabs against Israel, Palestinian uprising, which brought terror to the Israelis, terrorist attacks, bombs on buses, bombing civilian areas, 1,137 Israelis killed in terror attacks, around 3,000 Arabs killed in response from the Israeli government. And to stop this, Israel actually put up what was known as the security barrier, or the wall, or the fence, which is one of the main things which is used now against Israel as in propaganda against Israel. But remember, that was the reason why it went up, because of the terror which was launched against Israel at that time. Despite this, the world has continued to work for what they call the two-state solution, which is the proposal to solve the Arab-Israeli conflict in what is called two states for two groups of people. The two-state solution envisages an independent state of Palestine there from the West Bank and Gaza, alongside the state of Israel and to the west of the Jordan River. The boundary between the states has never been fixed, although the Palestinians say that they want all of it. Israel has said that they can't have all of it, for reasons which we'll see in a moment. But there is ongoing negotiations on this subject. What's interesting, again, from the point of view of Bible prophecy, which says that Jerusalem is going to be a burdensome stone burdening all nations, is that this subject has been the issue on the agenda of the United Nations, which has passed more resolutions on this subject than almost all of the other conflicts in the world to the present time. The UN, the US, the European Union and Russia made up what they call the Quartet, which is the four groups of nations who've been working to resolve the Arab-Israeli conflict. How many nations are involved in the UN, the US, the European Union and Russia? Well, actually all the nations of the world. But you've got also the most powerful nations in the world coming together to try to resolve this question. And you've had the Obama administration under its last, during the time of President Obama, trying to resolve it with its with Kerry going to hold the agreements, which didn't actually come to anything. In January 2017, France organized a conference involving 70 nations of the world to try to resolve it. Israel wasn't invited. Russia has offered to host talks, and now President Trump says he wants to cut a deal. But it's amazing that all of these great nations have been trying to resolve this area, which is a very small area, in fact, but trying to resolve this particular question. Mr. Netanyahu has said that one of the things which he would like the which he insists actually that the Palestinian Authority do, is to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. They've said, well, we recognize that Israel exists, but we're not going to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. So what's the significance about recognizing Israel as a Jewish state? It means accepting that Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state. And it means also the end of the conflict. It means that it's the final demand, if you like. They won't take it any further. And they continually refuse to do this. The clue to why this is actually in their emblem. This is the emblem of the PLO, of the FATAH, which is the political wing of the Palestine Liberation Organization. You can see here the guns, and that's part of the program to how to get control of the territory. And you can see that this is the map. Now, which country, what's that map show you? All of Israel from the Jordan to the sea. If you go to any anti-Israel demonstrations in London, which take place quite regularly, we go to some not to take part in them, but to stand with Israel on the other side, you'll find one of the chants which people say all the time is, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. If Palestine will be free from the river to the sea, what does that mean? It means the end of the state of Israel. Everything from the Jordan to the Mediterranean must be part of Palestine. And the Palestine Liberation Organization has its charter, which is the Palestine National Covenant, which says that the establishment of the State of Israel is illegal. says claims of historical or religious ties of Jews to Palestine are incompatible with the facts of history and the true conception of what constitutes statehood, Judaism being a religion, not an independent nationality. It denies any connection between the Jews and Israel, and denies that they have a right to be there. It actually calls for the elimination of Israel by armed struggle, and it says that this decree cannot be changed except with a 2/3 majority. Now, the Palestine Authority says that it has been changed. Israel disputes that they've actually had a formal change of it. And to this day, you'll find that in Palestinian propaganda, not propaganda, in news, if you like, what they put out to their children, what they put out in the education system, in the media, consistently actually calls for the whole of, from the river to the sea, to be part of Palestine. Calls Haifa a Palestinian port. It calls Acre and Jaffa Palestinian cities. It calls the whole area of Jerusalem actually part of Palestine. And it continually indoctrinates its children that the program ultimately is to replace Israel with a Palestinian state from the river to the sea. That's why Netanyahu insists that if they're going to make peace, they've got to accept the Jewish state of Israel. And that's what they so far refuse to do so. Israel also, of course, has concerns about its security. Here you have the distances from the West Bank. As I say, this is quite a small area. 11 miles from the West Bank here to Jaffa. Actually 9 miles from there. That place, Kfar Saba, I've been to Kfar Saba. There's a very good Messianic congregation there, led by Brother Tony Sperandeo. I've been there and stood on the roof of their building, and you can see from there into Qalqilia, just about half a mile away. Qalqilia, which is an Arab town just across the border. Also been up from here to a town called Alfei Menashe, which is just across the Green Line in the area of the West Bank, which is a Jewish settlement. And from Alfei Menashe, you have a magnificent view right across the whole of the coastal strip. You can see from more or less up here to Netanya, down to Ashdod. You can see the whole of Tel Aviv. You can see all of the populated area down below. It's a good place to take a photograph of the coastal strip of Israel from. But it's also a high place looking down over a valley. If you are militarily, you've got a high place looking over a valley where you've got a whole lot of people, you've got a bit of an advantage over them, haven't you? And for this reason, Israel doesn't want to have these areas in the hands of a hostile force, which could then use them to bombard their cities down below. Recently, Netanyahu also said that he insists that Israel will have a control over this border here, the border along the Jordan Valley between the West Bank and the city and the country of Jordan. Again, something which the Palestinians actually do not want to happen. One of the reasons why Israel doesn't want to make an unconditional withdrawal from these territories is because of this place, Gaza. They have experience of what happens. In 2005, Israel uprooted the settlers, Jewish settlers who lived in Gaza, handed over the farms which they had to the Arabs. Within a few weeks, they were trashed and turned into terrorist bases. In 2007, Hamas fought a battle with Fatah, which was the supposedly more moderate faction of the Arab movement. Hamas, the Islamic fundamentalist group, defeated Fatah, took control of the area of Gaza, and Hamas consistently rejects any concept of a peace process with Israel. They have a constitution which is based on the Islamic view, and it says its Islamic duty is to destroy Israel. Hamas is still really in a state of war with Fatah, the other faction in the Palestinian Authority. And the reason why Israel particularly doesn't want to hand over the West Bank unconditionally to the Arabs is because of what happened from Gaza, which is that missiles have been fired into Israel from Gaza, reaching right up here to almost the borders of Tel Aviv, and in fact some of them have almost reached Tel Aviv. So they've used the territory to fire missiles into Israel, which has caused conflicts in 2008, 2012, 2014. Generally, our media portrays Israel as the aggressor in these conflicts and shows you pictures of Arab towns and houses being smashed to the ground, and compares the number of casualties amongst the Arabs, which is much higher than the number of casualties amongst the Jewish people. One of the reasons for that is because the Hamas has put its rockets in populated areas, next to hospitals, next to schools, next to homes, and when Israel takes those missiles out, takes those places out with its missiles, then naturally civilians are caught up with it, and many of them are injured and many die. Not Israel's desire, but what happens. And you have to ask yourself, what would any government do if a neighbouring country was firing missiles into their territory? I once remember seeing a report in which Tzipi Livni, who was then I think the foreign minister of Israel, was being interviewed by a very uppity BBC reporter who was really blaming Israel for responding to all these rockets. And the BBC reporter said, how many rockets would you accept? How many rockets would be acceptable coming from Gaza into Israel? And she said, none! Which country would accept missiles coming from its territory into their territory? And the BBC reporter, I think, perhaps got the point, but it just seemed to me part of the anti-Israel spirit that they're supposed to accept being bombarded from someone else's territory and do nothing about it. Well, they have done something about it, and unfortunately people have suffered and died on both sides. More people have died from the Arab side because they don't protect their people, they put them in the way. Israel makes protection for its own people and finds places where they can be protected. Well, the other issue, which is a major issue, is the issue of the Jewish settlements. This map shows you some of the Israeli settlements in the West Bank. After the Six-Day War, Israel actually offered to return the territories in return for peace, security and negotiations with the Arabs. They sent back the three no's: no peace, no security, no negotiations. And from that point, Israel said, okay, well, we'll stay in the land, we'll stay in the area, and until they decide to make peace with us, we'll settle it. First of all, mainly with military places, but then with Jewish homes, often in areas of biblical significance. And if you study your Bible, you'll find that most of the places you know from the Bible are not in the coastal strip, they're in this area. You don't find out much about Tel Aviv or Haifa in the Bible. You hear a lot, of course, about Jerusalem, which is at the heart of the thing. You hear about Hebron, which is down here. Shechem, which is Nablus, which is somewhere up here. Bethlehem, which is somewhere down here. Jericho. Most of the places you know from the Bible are actually in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, as Jewish people prefer to call it. And there have been, of course, more and more Jewish homes built there, which the UN and others have declared to be illegal. Israel says it is legal as an occupying power in the interim work towards some settlement. In December 2016, the UN Security Council actually laid the blame for the failure to resolve the Arab-Israeli conflict on the establishment of settlements in the Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. Said that these had no legal validity, constituted a flagrant violation under international law, and a major obstacle to the vision of two states living side by side in peace and security within internationally recognized borders. So Israel's building of settlements is one of the main things which is used against Israel. There are some aspects of Israel's policy there which I do find somewhat uncomfortable. Nevertheless, as far as Israel is concerned, it has a right to build in these places. Talk about settlements, I'm not talking about a few caravans on the top of a hill. Basically, you're talking about towns, quite large towns. Some 176,000 people living in the area of Jerusalem, which is over the Green Line. That's in basically the West Bank area. Towns around Gush Etzion, which is to the south of Jerusalem, 49,000. Modi'in, 65,000. Male Adumim, 35,500. Ariel, 18,000. Quite large towns. All of these places, total, including Jerusalem, is 564,500 people, give or take a few. So you've got a large number of people living there. One of the demands of the Palestinians is that all of those should go. Israel says no way. So you have another point in which there is apparently an impasse. The big thing which is used in anti-Israel propaganda today is, of course, this place, the wall, which the security barrier. And if you go to any anti-Israel meetings, you'll hear talk about Israel as an apartheid state, which has separated the Palestinians from the Jews and built a wall so that they can't get to cross the wall. The wall is very unfortunate, and it's a sad thing that it has to be a wall there. The primary motivation from Israel's point of view was to stop terrorism. Interestingly, before 2000, between 1993 and 2000, the border was open. Israelis used to go to Ramallah in the West Bank to buy go to the market there because they could buy goods cheaper. Arabs would come into Israel to work. It wasn't Israel's desire actually to separate and have this wall. It's there because of the terrorism. It does, of course, make life very difficult for the Arabs, and it's something which is regrettable, but it's not Israel's desire to have it there. Israel would much rather live at peace and be able to dismantle this wall. Not a wall all the way, some parts of it are just a fence, but it's a barrier to keep Israel safe from terrorism. Israel also has a concern to the north, which is the Lebanon. Lebanon is just about there. Can't see it very well, the border goes somewhere along here. And there's a place called Carmiel, where again we have friends. Yossi Avadia runs a fellowship in Carmiel, just in the north of Israel. Those areas have been under bombardment from missiles from HEZBOLLAH since HEZBOLLAH took control of the area in the year 2000. In 2006, rocket attacks rained down from HEZBOLLAH into the north of Israel and caused the 2006 war. Again, you saw civilians being killed in Israeli attacks on the missile sites, which brought a lot of bad press for Israel. But remember that Israel was the victim, to begin with, of missiles being fired into its territory and had to defend its own people from those who came to destroy them. HEZBOLLAH now has the capability to rain down thousands of missiles onto Israel, supplied mainly by Iran. And Israel reckons that they have at least 120,000 to 150,000 rockets aimed at Israel, many of them now with much longer distances able to reach right through the land of Israel. Israel has its defense system, the Arrow missile defense, which is actually second to none in its effectiveness. It's an amazing system whereby they're able to shoot down incoming missiles as they come, which, if you think about it, is like hitting a bullet with a bullet. And they have actually defended their land with these missiles, which is the most incredible piece of advanced technology. However, it wouldn't be able to defend against a massive missile launch. If they launched thousands of missiles at once, they would get through. And that's what Israel is particularly concerned about. The other neighbor to the north is Syria, and Syria has been Israel's most implacable foe. Made a peace agreement with Egypt and with Jordan, but not with Syria. Syria wants to have back the area of the Golan Heights, which is there just to the south of Damascus. The UN has actually called on Israel to return the Golan Heights to Syria. And recently Russia has endorsed this claim, also saying that the major oil field which has been discovered on the Golan Heights should be returned to Syria because it's Syrian property. Iran has said that they want to remain in Syria after the settlement, and it has a brigade of troops working in Syria for the liberation, they say, of the Golan to Syria. We all know about the civil war in Syria, which has been the most horrendous event, causing hundreds of thousands of deaths, ruined cities, people displaced, refugees, and most difficult battle, very complex battle between Sunni Muslims, Shiite Muslims, secular, Islamist, with Islamic State adding a new dimension of terror and horror to the situation. You also have the Kurds against the Turks, the Saudis against the Iranians, the West who backed the secular moderate rebels against Assad, and Russia that backs Assad. And you've had all these complex forces coming into play upon this country, which has basically devastated and ruined it. But now what is interesting, which we're going to tie up in a moment with prophecy, is that Russia has moved in a big way. And Russia's actually become now the deciding factor in Syria. Along with Iran and with HEZBOLLAH from Lebanon, they have swung the momentum Assad's way. Now we have Russia saying that they want to, up in the north of Syria here, in the government-controlled area, there is a place called Latakia, one called Tartus, two Syrian towns where the Russians have said they want to have a permanent military base and a permanent naval base in Syria. You also have Iranian Revolutionary Guards fighting alongside Russia with HEZBOLLAH on Assad's side. Interestingly, Turkey has just moved into the north, taking control of this area, because they don't want the Kurds who are here to have a border right along their border. So you now have Russia, Turkey, Iran involved in the Syrian conflict. And recently they actually held a peace conference in Astana in Kazakhstan of Russia, Turkey and Iran trying to bring about a peace in Syria. That's kind of interesting for a reason we'll see in a moment, but just bear that in mind: Russia, Iran, Turkey. Israel's not involved because Israel, as far as they're concerned, this is an internal problem of Syria. They do have two red lines. One is that they don't want to have terrorists working on their borders, trying to bring back the Golan into Syrian control. And the second one is they don't want Iran stationing troops near its borders and supplying weapons of mass destruction and missiles to HEZBOLLAH. One of the prophecies in the Bible tells us that Damascus will cease from being a city, it will be a ruinous heap. Isaiah 17 verse 1. In fact, that picture, I'm not sure it is Damascus, it's probably one of the other cities of Syria. Aleppo, Homs and other places which have become virtual ruins. The center of Damascus has not been devastated, though suburbs of Damascus have been ruined. But in December 2016, Israel carried out 2 targeted attacks, causing massive explosions at the military facility near Damascus, a place called Mezeh. Avigdor Lieberman, who's the Israeli foreign minister, said that this was to prevent weapons of mass destruction being shipped from Iran to HEZBOLLAH through Damascus. And Israel has made attacks inside Syria on convoys on their way to Lebanon with arms imported from Iran to be used by HEZBOLLAH. And in fact, yesterday there was a report of an Israeli attack into Syria with a response from Syria, and Israeli anti-missiles were fired on missiles coming from Syria into Israel. So this is pretty up to date with what's happening. It's part of the ongoing issue. And behind all of this, as far as Israel is concerned, is this place, Iran. Netanyahu was once asked, what is Israel's problem? And he said, Iran, Iran, Iran. Iran is made no secret of its desire to destroy Israel. It says within 10 years Israel will be destroyed. Iran is accused of trying to work on a nuclear program. It's threatened to attack Israel and to destroy it within 10 years. Israel has also said it will attack and destroy Iran's nuclear program militarily. Hasn't been able to do that, and it hasn't done that so far because Iran made a peace agreement or an agreement to stop its nuclear program, which Israel says is completely bogus, and it believes that Iran is still working on a nuclear program, probably in conjunction with North Korea, and is working on missiles which are capable of reaching Israel and attacking Israel. Netanyahu recently went to Moscow and asked Putin not to allow Iran to have its forces stationed in Syria. Now, I said Iran has missiles capable of reaching Israel. Some of those missiles have got written on them in Persian, "for the destruction of the Zionist state." So Iran has made it very clear that its goal is to destroy Israel. Some of those missiles could be loaded with a nuclear device, and it's a reminder of the danger which Israel faces from this country to the north. Russia is heavily involved with Iran, and Russia has recently supplied Iran with this missile, which is the S-300, which is a very advanced missile capable of knocking out any aircraft flying towards Iran or any missile flying towards Iran, which means that now Israel actually could not mount a military attack on Iran's nuclear weapons, because this missile would take them out long before they got anywhere near Iran. Amir Tsarfati, who's a Messianic Jew who believes in the prophecies, says that all these developments are pushing the world towards the fulfillment of the prophecy of Ezekiel 38, the war of Gog and Magog. So is it? Well, we shall see. Ezekiel 38 says, "Now the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. Prophesy against him and say, Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, O Gog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya are with them, all of them with shield and helmet, Gomer and all its troops, the house of Togarmah, from the far north and all its troops, many people are with you." If you look in Ezekiel 38, this prophecy is something which is located in time, at the time after Israel is gathered from the nations. So it's located also with the end times. It's very clearly about the last days, and it's a prophecy which will lead up to further events dealing with the end of days. It deals with Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, the prince of Rosh, Nissi Rosh, prince of Rosh, which could mean the prince of Russia, or it could mean the chief prince. Wherever it means, it's a country which is to the far north. If you go to the far north of Israel, you get to Russia. And you have a great power which leads an alliance of nations, which includes Persia, which is modern Iran, Togarmah, which is Turkey, and some other countries there, Cush and Put, which is Ethiopia and Libya, which will join in this alliance to come against Israel in the latter days. Are we leading up to that? It's quite possible. How long? I don't know. But you're seeing things are happening today which are bringing together these nations into Syria. You're seeing that these nations have... Russia actually doesn't have at the present time an aggressive agenda towards Israel, but Persia certainly does. Turkey does as well. And you can see that these countries are assembling on the borders of Israel. If there should develop some kind of a conflict in which Israel attacks, or Hezbollah attacks, and Israel then attacks back against Hezbollah, which they said they would do, to the extent of possibly wiping out the whole infrastructure of Lebanon, including its electricity and its stuff, then that could prompt a countermeasure of an attack on Israel from the north from these countries. We're living in dangerous times. We're living in times, I believe, which are pointing us towards the fulfillment of these prophecies of the Bible, and which we should bear account of as we consider these things. In the book of Joel it says, "Behold, in those days I will gather, at that time I may bring back the captives of Judah and Jerusalem. I will also gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. I will enter into judgment with them there on account of my people, my heritage Israel, whom they've scattered among the nations. They've also divided up my land." Nations trying to divide up the land, having scattered Israel, but now Israel back in the land and about to be gathered again to battle against Jerusalem. Is this going to happen? Well, if you believe the Bible, it is. Is it the end of the story? No. Actually, God has other ideas. This is a map of the dimensions of the land according to the prophecy of Ezekiel in the millennial kingdom, when according to this prophecy, Israel will have all that land and dwell at peace in the midst of the nations.